Several days ago, I posted a video in my channel about Ubiquiti access points wireless mesh networks. Today, I'm going to continue this topic talking about the uplink priority. I'm going to use 4 UniFi access points to simulate totally 6 different scenarios so that we can understand how the uplink priority is set and how you can take advantage of it to change the network topology. This is my lab environment. I have a UniFi PoE switch. I will use 4 APs. So you may know to make the mesh network work, you have to have at least one AP which is directly wired with your UniFi switches. I'm going to use the U6 Enterprise to be wired to the switch, and then in different scenarios, I either change the locations of these 3 APs, or I will simply change their uplink priority settings. Then we can explore the different scenarios. Let's start with the simplest scenario. I have 2 APs wired to the switch and only one AP U6 mesh will be used in mesh mode. I put it closer to the U6 Pro in order to have stronger signals from U6 Pro. So I wanted to connect to the U6 Pro. I also put 3 different type of information for each AP. We will explain why they are important, where I get them. You can see they share the exact same SSID, which has the name vWire something. vWire, I guess it means virtual wires. They have the same SSID. It makes sense because they are in the same UniFi network, the same mesh network. You also know there's a thing called BSSID. I mark them in the address section. Each AP has different BSSID, even though they share the same SSID, right? That makes sense. And then the third part is the serial number. So you only need this information internally when you want to troubleshoot the mesh network. This value is the same as the hardware MAC address of each AP. It's unique to each AP. Okay, enough talking. Let's get into the system. This is the screen layout I'm going to use for this video. In the lower part of the window, I have 2 terminal sessions. I'm going to use them to log on to the AP to show you the backend configurations. Let's first look at the UniFi network controller. From the device list, you can see I have 3 APs power on, and even from the connection column, you can already see 2 of them are connected to the switch. One is connected in Wi-Fi mode, which means in mesh mode. And let's check the Wi-Fi configurations. As you can see, I only have one SSID configured. It's called Zmesh. And if you check the configuration itself for the SSID, you can see I only enabled one Wi-Fi band 5G just to simplify this video. If you check each individual AP, for example, the U6 Enterprise, go to settings and under radius setting in the end, you can see the meshing related configuration, and you can enable or disable meshing. For each AP, I set the meshing option in alter mode. So this is the first scenario. Remember I mentioned this is the simplest scenario because they all work in alter mode. So I'm not going to show you the setting for the other AP, but basically they are the same. Let's SSH into this particular U6 mesh AP. Let's see how it's connected to the U6 Pro AP and why it doesn't connect to the U6 Enterprise AP. Let's find it out. Okay, for both sessions, I'm in the U6 mesh backend. In the left side, let me show you the WPA supplicant configuration. First, find out where is the configuration for WPA supplicant. The way I find it out is to run ps command. I want to look for the string WPA supplicant. So see here, this is the path for the configuration file. Display this particular file. It's super simple. The reason is everything is configured in alter mode. AP scan equals to true. The important part is the network section. Each network is called a network block. So for this particular case, we only have one network block. It specifies this SSID. Why this U6 mesh knows this SSID? Because previously it was adopted to this particular unified network, so the controller notified the U6 mesh of this SSID. Even though I just power it on, it was not connected to the unified network, but this information was already saved beforehand. Apparently the PSK is used for authentication because it only needs to connect to one SSID. It doesn't matter which AP to connect to. That's why it only has one PSK. Then the following section specifies the authentication related settings. Priority. This is a little bit confusing part because you may think 1 means highest priority, but you simply treat the number as a ID. So later you will know you need this information to troubleshoot to see which AP the U6 mesh connect to. So then let's discuss a little bit about the background scan. There are 3 numbers. The way to read it is if the RSSI, the signal strength, is lower than -70 dBm, it will scan the environment every 900 seconds. Otherwise, it will only scan the network to refresh the information every hour. Okay, it's a very simple backend configuration. Then let's try to understand why for this particular case the U6 mesh chose to connect to U6 Pro instead of U6 Enterprise. And you can confirm the current topology in network controller. See, the U6 mesh is connected to U6 Pro in dash line, which means it's in mesh mode. So in the right side SSH, I will run another command. It's called WPA CLI. It's a interactive command line interface tool to interact with WPA supplicant. And the command I'm going to run is scan. Basically, I'm manually scanning the environment. Remember in the left part, we mentioned this frequency for the automatic scan, right? But in the right side, now I'm manually do the scanning. Let's try to read the result. It mentioned 3 SSIDs in the result. Let's talk about them one by one. First one, if you compare the SSID value to the one in the diagram, you can see that's the same one. This SSID is being broadcasted by this particular unified network. And the second one, the same case, is the same SSID, right? But if you compare the BSSID value, you can see they are different. Why? Because they are from different AP. This BSSID is for U6 Pro. Another one is 6A something, the U6 Enterprise BSSID. You may have question about the third SSID. It's not from this unified network because for each unified network, you can only have one mesh SSID. This one is different. Where it's coming from? In fact, from my home network. This is just my lab environment. In parallel, I'm running my home network. It's also using UniFi APs. So U6 mesh is close to my home network's AP, so it's also receiving its signals. So that's why here it lists 3 SSIDs. It's already sorted, has different ID number. It's sorted by what? By the weight. In this video, we don't have enough time to talk about how the weight value is derived. Basically, as long as if the weight value is higher, that means it should have higher priority if you don't force the connection using the manual mode. If you set everything in alter mode, the system will simply choose the higher weight value with higher priority. Okay, that's how the alter mesh mode works. it simply scans the network, find out all the related vWire SSIDs. It will give them different weight, and then it will choose the highest priority one to connect to. And here in the end of the scan result, it says it's selected priority group 1 AP. What's priority group 1? If you check the left side, it's mentioned in the configuration. So this is for our outer mesh network configuration. Everything makes sense. This is for the simplest scenario. You only have one mesh child AP, and it will automatically connect to the parent AP, which has stronger signals. Let's move on to the next scenario. This should be a very short one. I have the exact same configurations in the lab environment, but I move this U6 mesh even closer to one of my home network's AP. Even though they are all UniFi access points, this particular one is not in this UniFi network. Whether the U6 mesh will prefer this one and connect to another UniFi network. Let's find it out. From the right side network topology, you can already see the U6 mesh still connect to U6 Pro. Nothing's changed. It still belongs to this particular correct UniFi network. And in the lower part of the window, it's still the exact same WPA supplicant configuration file. There's only one network block, and the SSID is still the same one as we discussed in the first scenario. Let's check the right side. Let me do a scan again. It still lists the 3 SSID with different BSSID, right? But see the first one with the highest weight? It is the foreign SSID. It is not we want for this particular UniFi network, right? Because now the U6 mesh is closer to the foreign access point. See the end? It still select the priority group 1, which is in the left side, this particular SSID. So it doesn't matter how close it is to another network's access point. It won't mesh to it. It will still connect to the UniFi network it belongs to. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to the next scenario. So I have the exact same devices, the exact same physical locations for these 3 APs. What if I do not want to move the location of this AP, but I also don't want it to connect to the U6 Pro? I want it to connect to the U6 Enterprise, even though this one is not as close as U6 Pro. You may ask in real world why you want to do that. There may be multiple reasons. For example, I will do some maintenance to this U6 Pro from time to time. I don't want the other APs and the other Wi-Fi clients to be impacted. So I don't want the other APs to connect to it. And also, for example, you have some very important Wi-Fi clients using this particular AP. So you don't want this AP to be impacted in any way. So you want to redirect the traffic to another access point. UniFi Network Controller does provide a way for you to put your influence on the network topology. Go to the network controller devices. I want to change the behavior of U6 mesh. So let me click on it. Go to settings. Under the meshing setting, by default it's auto, right? Let me choose menu. It will ask me the uplink priority. By default, again, it's auto. But if I don't like it, in my case, I want to choose U6 Enterprise. Choose it. And then you see priority 2 combo box. Ignore it at this moment. We will discuss it in later scenarios. So I'm good in the setting part. Apply changes. Then let me display the network topology. All the changes will be effective later. It will take some time. After about 1 or 2 minutes, the configuration is effective and the AP scan is done within the U6 mesh. Now it's connected to the U6 Enterprise. Let's go to the backend to see what really happened over there. By the way, in the lower part of the screen, the two SSH sessions are broken because the U6 mesh was temporarily offline, refreshing its settings. Now I'm in again. In the left part, you can see the configuration file is changed already. It has two network blocks. Let's start with the second network block. If you examine it carefully, it has the same priority group as we discussed in the first scenario. The only difference is in the background scan part. Trigger threshold for RSSI, the signal strength, is -90 dBm instead of 70. And the frequencies are changed accordingly as well. That's the only change for this network block. But the brand new network block is this one. Let's look into that. It has the exact same SSID. There's an interesting new line. It's serial. Let's check the diagram. These two wired access points, they can both be the candidate parent mesh AP for the U6 mesh, right? So there has to be a way for U6 mesh to differentiate these two. How? A parent choice is the hardware MAC address for these two devices. So see the configuration file for WPA supplicant. The second network block, this is the outer one. It doesn't distinguish different APs. It simply specifies the SSID. But all the APs, they are broadcasting the same SSID, right? That's why here in this new network block, it specifies the serial number. And if you check the serial number, it's for this U6 enterprise. That's the U6 enterprise MAC address. So basically what this configuration block is really saying is my preference is to connect to AAP broadcasting this SSID and with this serial number. That's what this network block is really saying. And because it appears before the second network block and because it has a priority number which is bigger, this one will become the first choice for U6 mesh to connect to the UniFi network. Let's examine the WPA CLI result. Do a scan. A similar situation, we have 3 SSIDs, 3 different BSSIDs. Ignore this foreign SSID, it's not relevant to us at all. Let's focus on the first two. Yes, SSID, they are the same, but they have different BSSID. Look further, see this additional information, it says serial. For this two line I highlight here, it lists their corresponding BSSID and their corresponding serial. WPA supplicant will choose the AP to connect to based on the serial instead of based on the weight. In this case, you can see this one has higher weight. This one is for U6 Pro. We can tell from the BSSID, right? Even though it has stronger signal, in the end, our mesh client, it's not connecting to it. It connects to the other one because the other one has the correct serial which match the WPA supplicant configuration, the serial number here. That's how internally the uplink priority in meshing network, how it works. It's based on the serial, which is the hardware MAC address. The mesh client will make the selection. Okay, I hope it's clear. Now we can move on to a more interesting scenario. I only connect one AP, U6 Enterprise, with the switch. It is wired. All the other APs, they will be meshed. To make the things more complicated, I add the fourth access point, a U6 Lite. And I will configure the U6 Lite so that it will prefer the U6 Pro to mesh to this AP instead of the other two. So this is the final topology I want to achieve. Let's go to the network controller. So this is the current network topology, the U6 Pro and the U6 Mesh. They are connecting to U6 Enterprise as expected in mesh mode, but the U6 Lite is connected to the U6 Mesh instead of what we want, connect to the U6 Pro, right? Let's make the change on the U6 Lite part. Click on it, go to setting. In the menu meshing mode, let me choose the U6 Pro as the uplink priority 1, U6 mesh as the uplink priority 2, and apply changes. Give it some time. After a while, the topology automatically refresh. U6 Lite is connecting to U6 Pro now. That's exactly what we expect. Then in the lower part of the window, let me SSH into U6 Lite. Let's check the WPA supplicant configuration file, and let's do a manual network scanning. In the left part, as you can see in the configuration file, now it has 3 blocks. The first 2 are similar. They both have the serial number specified. The difference is the first one has the serial number for U6 Pro, and the second one, the serial number is for U6 mesh. These 2 network blocks are for the 2 uplink configurations we did in network controller. And because the first one appears in the beginning and it has a bigger number priority, so we'll have the highest priority. That's why it's called uplink priority 1 in the network controller. And the second network block is for the uplink priority 2. The third one is for the alter configuration without serial number specified. Okay, then in the right part, let me do a scan again. See, it lists 4 lines. 3 of them have the same SSID because they are for these 3 access points in our lab environment network, right? And there's another one. It is from my home network. As we discussed before, this one is not relevant, so let's ignore it. Let's check the other 3. They have the same SSID, no problem. And they have different BSSID, no problem, because they are from 3 different APs. They carry different serial numbers. Everything is expected. Then let's examine the weight, which is derived based on the signal strength and the hop number. We will explain in details in another video, but let's simply check the weight. The highest weight is for this BSSID. This one, as shown in the diagram, is from our U6 Enterprise. By default, if we don't specify any uplink priority, the U6 Lite should have been connected to U6 Enterprise. Then move on to the next one. It has the B6 something BSSID. It corresponds to the U6 Pro. And the last one is DA something for U6 mesh. So this is the weight sequence without our manual overwritten configurations. But because in the configuration we set the U6 Pro as the priority 1, U6 mesh as the priority 2. In the end, see the very last sentence is connecting to the priority group 3. Check the left side. 3 is for the first network block, which is for U6 Pro. Everything's clear and the result is expected. That's what we want it to be. Okay, move on to next scenario. What if something's wrong in one of the access points and we happen to configure our U6 Lite, use it as the uplink priority? What will happen? Will the system automatically recover, or we have to jump in to manually change something? Let's find it out. So I will simulate a issue for the U6 Pro. I will simply unplug its power. It will be completely down. Let's see what will happen. In the network controller, you can see the U6 Pro is offline. If we check the topology, you can see it's automatically recovered. Now U6 Lite is connected with U6 mesh. That's the exact purpose why you have 2 options in the manual mesh setting, uplink 1 and uplink 2. So when uplink 1 is done, it will automatically switch to uplink 2. So in the left part, I am displaying the exact same WPA supplicant configuration file. Nothing's changed. Even though the U6 Pro, which corresponds to the first network block, is already done, even though this U6 Lite AP knows that, the configuration file is not changed. It reflects what we have in the network controller settings. If we switch to the right part, let's do a manual scan. It only returns 3 lines now. The second one is for the foreign AP. Let's ignore it. The other two correspond to U6 Enterprise and U6 Mesh respectively. Because we set the U6 Mesh as the uplink priority 2, in the end, see the result is connected to the priority group 2 AP, which is for this network block for our U6 Mesh AP. It works as expected and it works automatically without any manual interventions. That's good. Let's move on to the very last scenario. Let's simulate both uplink APs. They are done. So let's see whether the U6 Lite will stuck there or it will automatically switch to U6 Enterprise. Okay, I just unplugged the power for U6 Mesh to simulate both APs are done. After a while, in the real-time network topology, you can see we only have 2 APs left, and now U6 Lite is connected to U6 Enterprise. We didn't manually do any configuration change. It's automatically recovered. Perfect. In the lower part, the configuration file remains the same. We still have 3 network blocks, but if we do a manual scan, let's check the result. It only found 1 AP with our desired SSID. It is for the U6 Enterprise. And in the end, it says the current selected one is priority group 1. In the left part, for priority group 1, it is for the outer network. Of course, U6 Enterprise falls within this category. That's why U6 Enterprise is selected, and the U6 Lite is a mesh child of U6 Enterprise. Okay, finally, this is the end of the video. After the back and forth simulated changes, and we can see the implementation of Ubiquiti's mesh network uplink priority is pretty good. And once you set it up, the network topology will reflect what you want. In disasters, it will recover automatically. Okay, thanks for watching.